or Toronto? Your questions.
Mayor Tory, you said that it would be a great mistake for the province to not invest in either transit or social housing. That was your one request, that they match that money, and we didn't see that on either file yesterday. You know, you said that you are disappointed, but this is the one thing that you asked of them in the wake of the tolls reversal, and we didn't get it, is Toronto not being completely shortchanged by this budget.
I think Toronto is being completely shortchanged, and I made the point. I'm disappointed. I'm frustrated. I find it unbelievable that we would miss the opportunity when you do have the federal government stepping up in a significant way. You have the city government saying it will step up and has stepped up in these areas, and we've missed the opportunity, at least for this budget, of having all three governments act in concert. And I believe that is a grave mistake. It is a short-sighted point of view, and it doesn't acknowledge the need to keep building. We are in the mess we're in today on both transit and housing because governments at all different levels took so many years off not investing, and that never did they act together, all three, to say we must fix these things. So we have a deficit to catch up on, and why would we want to repeat the behavior of the past and get ourselves into a deeper hole for the future when we have a growing city? We know that. We know their projections of population show there are literally millions of people going to be living in this area in the years to come, millions of new people. And what that means is we'd be doing now what we should have been doing for 30 or 40 years, which is continuously building transit, always having new projects that are on the books and getting designed and getting built, and that we should be renewing housing and adding to it to make sure that we can look after the people and move them and house them properly who are going to be living here.
Mayor Tory, you seem to have a good relationship with the Premier over your 2+ years in office, a good kind of co-working relationship. Things seem to have gone cold just the last few months. I mean, what's, just from your point of view, why do you think the province, as you say, turned their back on the city?
I'll say to you, in all honesty, I think there's an inconsistency between the Kathleen Wynne that I know and that I've come to know quite well, because she does care about Toronto, and she does know about Toronto, and she cares about people who are struggling, and including people who are struggling just to get around, to get to work and so on, because there's inadequate public transit. And I just think maybe what she needs to have is a boost of confidence to act on what she knows is right, to build Toronto, not because it's more important than anywhere else in the province, but because it is the economic engine, because there are 3 million people who live here. And so I'm going to strongly encourage her MPPs to give the boost she needs to say, it's time to stand up and say, this is the economic engine of Toronto. There are people that are improperly housed. There are public assets that are falling down. There's transit that needs to be built for the future, and that you can stand up with our full support, the members of Parliament from Toronto, the members of Provincial Parliament, and build on that federal money to get that stuff done.
Just as a follow-up to that, sorry, real quick. There's an election in a year, and a lot of the talk is that the Premier is focusing on the 905 to get votes. Do you think Toronto's falling by the wayside because of political gain?
I can't really comment on, what strategy or what thinking lies behind this. I only know that doing the right thing for Toronto and 3 million people who live here, who are citizens of Ontario, who reside in the economic engine of the province, the city that sends billions of dollars, more than we get back, to the government to finance programs in other parts of the province. And you don't hear me expressing any resentment about that. I'm just saying, let's just make sure that in the process of doing all that, we look after Toronto's needs and make sure we can stay strong as an economic engine and stay fair as a place to live by making sure that we fund transit and housing properly. And at a moment when you have the federal government stepping up to the tune of billions of dollars over the next number of years, it's not just a one-time deal, that is the time when the province should have stood up and said, we're there too, with the City of Toronto. We've demonstrated our good faith, especially on the housing file with respect to the money we've put up. And we're just saying we need the others to come to the table to address what is a very real social need and a very responsible thing to do, namely to repair that housing.
Mr. Mayor, you said,
Charles Sousa, do you think he may play a role in the lack of confidence that Kathleen Wynne may have? He came on John Tory's show this morning and basically said, Toronto's getting billions of dollars, it's enough.
Well, I would just ask the question whether it's enough if we have housing units that are threatened to be closed because of the lack of repair after we've invested or will have invested by the end of this year $1 billion. I would ask if it's enough. Are we just saying, consistent with what I said about playing the old highlights reel and saying, boy, that was exciting back then, and we never have to build any more transit beyond that which has been announced? I don't think there's a single person you would find in the City of Toronto that would say we should just stop building transit now with the list of projects we have and not bother going forward. I acknowledge the province has participated in every one of the projects that is currently underway. We're talking here about projects that keep building for the future, that keep meeting the need of a growing city, a city that is already straining but is going to grow even further. And I'm just saying the responsible thing to do is to be announcing now that you're moving ahead to do the planning and the design and to fund those projects, and that the federal government has done that. And that we now need the province to do the same so that we can actually proceed with these projects and build the transit we need and build the housing we need. I have no idea who's influencing her. I am just saying this. I am going to sit down with all of the members of provincial parliament in the Liberal government from Toronto and encourage them in the task of saying to the Premier, you know what's right. You understand Toronto. You care about Toronto. You care about the fact this is the country's and the province's strongest city. Let's make sure it stays strong in terms of its social and economic fabric by making these investments now.
What has the relationship been like, though, with Charles Sousa?
My relationship with him and with the Premier has been cordial, and there sometimes appears to be an inconsistency between people saying, don't worry, we're going to make sure the right investments are made, and then you read the budget and you're kind of flipping through the pages, trying to find, where some of the specifics are. I mean, I note with interest, for example, if you look at their budget, they're going to take in several $100 million more in land transfer tax this year that we're in now, the new budget year. And I would just say, well, we know that a couple of $100 million of that is coming out of the City of Toronto, just on transactions that will take place this year in the City of Toronto. Why wouldn't they have sort of said even that kind of an amount was going to be given over to fund housing repairs as new money? I would urge you all to read very carefully the fine print, because when they talk about investments they're making in social housing, please follow up with a question, which is how much new money this year, beyond the energy retrofitting money, which I've acknowledged many times and which is a relatively small amount relative to their share of the repair bill, how much new money is in this year's budget for social housing repair? And I think you'll be very interested in the answer. And then maybe I would follow up with a question for Mr. Sousa at that stage and say, well, what does that indicate about your commitment to addressing that vitally important issue in our city?
That question was asked yesterday very forcefully by the Globe and Mail reporter to Minister Sousa, and he said, we're giving the city $2 billion, seeming to say that's enough. So what is your follow-up question to it?
Well, it's not a follow-up question, it's a follow-up statement. The fact of the matter is that if you look at the transit file and say, what did they say with respect to their intentions to match the federal money that's been put forward for new transit projects? New transit projects. They're specifically enumerated on a list we were required to approve as a council and send to the federal government. The Waterfront LRT, the Scarborough East LRT, Smart Track, and the Relief Line. And what new money was allocated in the budget to fund any of those projects to see that those get built, to match the federal money that is there, or that is about to be there, that's been announced in their budget. So you can ask that question, and you can ask on the housing question, what new money was allocated for social housing beyond the relatively modest amount of money that was put forward for energy retrofitting in previous budgets that is flowing now, but it was old money, as I would say. It's from the highlights reel. And by highlights reel, I don't mean to diminish it or make fun of it. I'm just saying you can't show, the old highlights reel and say that's our future plan. The old highlights reel is what it is. It's what you did before and what you announced before. But we still have in front of us challenges that are necessary to be met in the interests of a growing city, and those were unaddressed, largely and almost completely in yesterday's budget.
Mr. Mayor, one of the transit projects that remains unfunded is the Eglinton East LRT. You've done that as part of a Scarborough network of transit that includes the Scarborough subway extension. Without that Eglinton East LRT, without funding for it from the province, is it fair to say that unless something drastically changes, all that Scarborough is going to get is that non-stop subway?
I've indicated that all of these transit projects are, contingent based on the present availability of funds on having some degree of provincial participation. And I'm not going to go to the place that says, well, it's not going to get done, any one of these. I'm still optimistic that if we put the case forward, and now I'm going to move to the individual MPPs and move to talking to the other political party leaders, they will understand the absolute necessity of funding all of these transit projects. Let's remember what happened here. At the City of Toronto Council, for the first time, we actually approved a long-range transit plan that consisted of a number of projects that aren't yet funded, but that need to be built, and they're based on a prioritization approved by the Council. And on that list is the Scarborough LRT, the Scarborough East LRT. And so I'm determined to see it built because it is part of a plan for Scarborough as well. You know the plan for Scarborough consists of Smart Track, the Scarborough subway extension, and the Scarborough East LRT. It's an integrated plan for Scarborough. And so I want to move forward with all parts of it, and I'm determined to do so. I have the support of the federal government. We have pieces of the support from the city here. The tolls, as you know, we're supposed to fill in the remainder of that. We have that issue to deal with, but I'm now today dealing with the province and saying that I would expect on a council-approved list of transit projects supported by now the federal government financially, they would step up to.
Sir, I'm just wondering, it seemed very unlike you yesterday to abruptly cancel your press conference and your interviews. Were you caught off guard by that lack of investment?
No, I was actually just very consumed by, the matters of council all day, and then I sort of came down here, and I just decided it would be in my own best interests. I mean, I certainly make myself available to you, I think, on as regular basis as any other elected official in the country, and I just decided that I would be better off to take the time to look through the material carefully, and that it wasn't going to impair unduly your news coverage. And I apologize if it, altered your schedules and so on, but I just decided it would be in the best interest of the City of Toronto if the Mayor spoke this morning, as opposed to speaking last night, just because I'd have time to collect my thoughts and talk to a few other people and so on, which was really not as possible as I thought it might be in light of the council meeting going. Not on anybody's partisan interest, but focused on the interests of the people of the City of Toronto. And I can tell you right now, the whole purpose of the exercise of going around to visit with the MPPs and the party leaders and the officials of all of the parties, including the Liberals, will be who I think has stepped up in terms of making commitments with respect to the future best interests of the City of Toronto, especially on transit and housing, but not limited to that. So I will have no hesitation about that. And I think if you remember the way I tried to do that federally, I tried to treat fairly everybody's initiatives, but I did make clear when I thought, that one party was doing a little more than another, that I would make note of that. And that was for the people then to decide on. I didn't say to them how I thought they should vote. I just said these are the facts based on the policies as we understand them.
Mayor Tory, how are you going to address the budget with council today?
Well, I'm going to do three things, two of which I've mentioned. I'm going to do visit with the and make a point of illustrating to the provincial MPPs what the consequences are of the failure of the government to put any funds forward in the budget to invest in the future of Toronto when it comes to housing and transit. I'm going to be stepping up my program of sitting down with all of the party leaders, but including the opposition party leaders, to discuss this with them and to press them, quite frankly, on what they're going to do to help meet our needs. And then I will introduce, finally, at Council today, probably around the midday, whenever the chance arises with all that's going on, a motion that makes it very clear to the federal government, as I've tried to do and as my fellow mayors have done as well, that we really expect them, or hope they will, put a strong matching requirement into their funding program so that this will compel, quite frankly, the provinces, including Ontario, to step up and match this new money with new money of their own so that we can have more available to fund these projects for the future, as opposed to simply repeating stories about past investments, which are true stories, but stories about past investments.
Une question en français rapidement.
Peut-être au sujet du budget.
Oui, c'est ça. Votre message à Kathleen Wynne, puis comment vous allez faire pour passer de la déception à l'action?
Pas de déception, mais je pense que nous avons besoin d'argent nouveau pour la transportation en commun et pour le logement. Et le budget de hier n'a pas inclus l'argent nouveau. Et nous avons besoin d'argent nouveau de construire les projets de logement public et le projet de transportation en commun.
Last question.
Yeah.
Yesterday, we heard Councillor Cressy say that the government of Ontario should be ashamed for the lack of commitment to social housing. Would you agree with that statement?
I certainly think they've turned their backs on the needs that we've clearly identified, and I'm puzzled by that. I'm disappointed by that. And I think that I really want to sort of focus on the fact that I believe Premier Kathleen Wynne understands this city. And she understands the needs of the city. The roots of her political involvement came from her standing up and speaking up for Toronto. She's now the Premier of Ontario, I understand that. But I think she also understands very well the importance of the social and economic health of this city to the well-being of the province of Ontario. And I think that any objective examination would say that the investments I'm talking about here today in public transportation and in housing are essential to the maintenance of the economic and social strength of this city.